I'm Walt Wheeler, Executive Director of the Michigan Masonic Charitable Foundation, and we're here today recording another in our Legacy series, recordings of past Grand Masters of the Grand Lodge of Michigan. With us here today is Most Worshipful Brother David R. Bedwell Sr., who was Grand Master of Michigan in the years 2002 and 2003. David, welcome.
Thank you.
Nice to have you with us.
It's nice being here and to take part in the Legacy series.
We're going to start at the very beginning. Tell us where you were born.
I was born approximately 1.5 miles south of here in Oakwood Hospital in 1955.
And did you grow up in this area?
I did, not too far from here, just a short distance away.
Tell us a little bit about your mom and dad.
Well, my father, Rodney, with his brother, owned a series of service stations early on. And then shortly thereafter, he went to work for Ford Motor Company, where he retired from. And my mother, Annie, used to work at the old SS Kresge stores. And basically, she was a stay-at-home mom and raised her 2 kids.
Well, you mentioned that there were 2 children. You have a sister, Margaret. Tell us a little bit about Margaret.
I have a sister, Margaret. She's 3 years younger than I. She was an X-ray technologist. She still is, but she's no longer in that field due to an injury, trying to get a very drunken patient up onto the X-ray table who fought her and ended up hurting her back pretty bad. And so now she's at Henry Ford Hospital in supply management.
Where, in growing up in this area, where did you go to school?
Well, I went to school at Hague Elementary, which isn't far from here, and then Clara Bryant, excuse me, Clara Bryant Junior High School, which is now called a middle school. And then I graduated from Dearborn High School in 1973.
1973. Did you go to college or vocational school after that?
I went to Henry Ford Community College, which isn't far from here also, where I obtained a associate's degree in automotive technology, and then I took several other classes at the Detroit College of Business.
Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about your first job. What was your very first job?
My first job that was actually a paycheck instead of somebody handing you cash for shoveling snow was at Baskin & Robbins Ice Cream Parlor for $1 an hour. And it was a 4-hour shift, and so I got $4 minus taxes plus 2 free scoops of ice cream per shift. And after working there for quite a while, you hated the sight of ice cream, and so I would bring home 2 scoops of French vanilla ice cream to my grandmother who lived with us at the time, and she enjoyed that.
Actually, I think the 2 scoops of ice cream would have been a great bonus. So what was your next job after Baskin Robbins?
Well, because my father was involved in service stations, and he never wanted me to have anything to do with that, I basically been working on automobiles with him since I was 9 years old. And so my job after that, I went to work for a golf station, which was just down the street from the Baskin & Robbins, as a pumping gas and doing minor repairs on cars. And then from there, I graduated into the dealerships, and I was a Jeep mechanic for American Motors dealership. And then from there, I ended up at Ford Motor Company.
And what did you do at Ford Motor Company?
Early in my career, I was in testing. Tested shock absorbers, or struts as they're now called, small engine components, did vibration testing on components, and then from there moved into engineering technology. I handled all the prototype designs and interfaced with suppliers to have those designs built into prototypes, and then went and had those prototypes tested to make sure they met design standards. And toward the end, I was also a vehicle coordinator, handling all the test cars in the test fleet. And then I eventually retired.
How long were you at Ford?
I was at Ford Motor Company 30 years. And I left the last day of February 2007, along with about 10,000 other engineers. And that's why Ford Motor Company during that period of time didn't have to take any government buyouts. It's because we took the buyout package. The magic number was age 50 with 30 years, and I was age 51 with 30 years. So I qualified for my full retirement.
Very good. Tell us how you met your wife, Pauline.
Actually, a buddy of mine was on a bowling league, and he was bowling every Monday night, and he invited me up to come have a few beers with him and watch him bowl and just socialize. And After going up there a couple of times, I identified certain young ladies in the room, and my wife was one of those, and we met, started dating, and the rest is kind of history. We'll be married 33 years in July 26th of this year.
Excellent. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You have 2 children.
I have 2 children. David Bedwell Jr., he's 30 years old, and our daughter Ashley, who's going to be 24. And David is also a Mason, and he just recently joined the Scottish Rite. Ashley is a stay-at-home mom, currently lives with us with our granddaughter Claire. Claire will be 2 years old in August. And David and his wife just recently had a new baby boy, my grandson, and his name is David R. Bedwell III, or we just call him DB3.
DB3, I like that. I know that you enjoy certain sports. I know that you enjoy golf, for example. Are there any other sports or hobbies that you're particularly good at or that you enjoy doing?
Well, I used to really enjoy hunting, and did a lot of deer hunting, for years, up until the year my father passed away. And my dad and I used to go hunting together all the time. And once he passed away, interest waned. And then as the years went by, it was just easier and easier just not to go. And then my Masonic responsibilities kind of took place also in the month of November, and it just worked out that I just haven't been hunting in about the last 12 years. Maybe someday, as my grandson now gets older, my son and possibly him will pick it up again. But so right now the main sport is golf and Masonry.
Very good. Do you enjoy watching any other sports?
I enjoy college football. I enjoy pro football. Baseball, a little bit, if the Tigers get in the playoffs. Other than that, I find it a little slow pace, but I still enjoy it. But mainly college football.
And I know you're a big U of M fan.
I am. Yeah, the whole family is.
Very good. How did you first learn about the Masonic fraternity?
Well, of course, my father. My father was a very active Mason and was for years. And growing up, as he progressed in the lines of the lodge to work his way up to Worshipful Master, each year we would attend the installation of officers. And because he was active on the Masonic Temple Association as president for many years and maintaining the building, I would come up here to help him maintain the building. So I got to know many of the men that were members of the lodge, as well as the building in general, because I did so much work here. And so my father was the main reason. It took me a while before I joined the fraternity, though, because even though I recognized what it was and the men, I respected all the men that were involved in the lodge, I just wasn't quite ready. I had been in Boy Scouts since I was a Cub Scout and worked my way up. I was in a very active troop, became Eagle at age 14, then went into Explorer Scouting and became an Explorer Advisor. And then as my son became of age, I was active with his pack. And then I became the PAC chairman that interfaced with the school, who was the sponsoring body. So I've been involved in scouting for years, and I was never a card carrier. And I told my father, I said, I'm not a card carrier, and I'm not quite ready to join. And I'm not going to join an organization just to carry a card. And I guess in my heart I knew all along that eventually I'd join the fraternity, but it wasn't until my father was diagnosed with prostate cancer, which turned out all well and good, but that was the first time cancer was a word in the family, and it put a scare through the entire family. And I got to thinking, you know, if I'm going to do this, I guess I better do it now. I don't want to wait till something happens and then say, gee, I wish I woulda, coulda, shoulda. So I asked him for, actually the Masonic Masters Association, which is a group here in southeastern Michigan, was sponsoring a cruise on the old Bobolo boats, which are now decommissioned. And my wife and I at the time went on that cruise. And it was on that cruise, I was sitting at a table with my mom and dad, and I said, you know, why don't you just give me a petition? And I couldn't believe the look on his face. It was like, what did you just say? You know, and so the next day there was a petition sitting there with a check all signed and made out attached to it to join the lodge. And I often say, I joined Freemasonry because of my father. I stay a Freemason because of the friendships and the fellowships and the men that I've come to know and love in this fraternity. And
I agree. What year was that you joined?
February 20th, 1989, I was raised.
And it was in Dearborn Lodge?
It was in this building that we're sitting in. It's Dearborn Lodge, correct.
Good. How long before you started in the officer line?
I started in the officer line that November. I was elected junior steward, and then progressed up. And Dearborn Lodge had a bylaw requirement that before you could sit in the chair of junior deacon, you had to give one of the 3 lectures in open lodge. So I learned the entered apprentice lecture and went on to be junior deacon, and then moved my way up, and eventually in 1995 was installed master.
So do you have any fond memories of your time as master of the lodge? Any things that just pop right out at you?
You know, it was all about wanting to make things better and improve the lodge. When I was senior deacon, I put together a report, which I just recently came across, and it was called Time for a Change. And I had worked with the secretary and had obtained all the membership numbers for the last 10 years from that point. And Excel was just a rather new piece of software at the time, and using it to crunch numbers and graph. And I put together a series of graphs and projected out all the way to roughly 2000, 2002. And this would have been in 1992. Showing that at the current rate of life memberships and at the current rate of dues and everything else, that the lodge would be technically out of business by 2002 if they didn't make some serious changes. So moving on as master, it was to help implement some of those changes. And those changes weren't accepted very well by some of our older members. Men that I highly respected. The one stood up in lodge and called me a liar that I didn't know what I was talking about. And you know, and as I found that report in my files just a few weeks ago and was going back over it, the lodge did make the changes necessary. And so right now, of course, we're not out of business, and it's 2013. But what was in that report was very true and would have came to pass had some of those changes not taken place. So from that point on until even today, it's all about renewing this fraternity and make certain that it's still here for the years to come, for my grandson to join, and for his grandson, and etc.
So what were some of your recommendations in that report?
Some of them were to deal with life memberships. And even though our Masonic law says a lodge may grant a life membership after 40 years, our life memberships were almost surpassing our dues-paying members. And so the lodge kept waiting for Grand Lodge at the time to make the changes necessary to deal with life memberships, and to this day that hasn't come to pass. So Dearborn Lodge put in a bylaw amendment raising our life memberships up to 50 years. And that was adopted and approved by the Grand Master at that time, and it's still true today. And that helped a great deal. Dearborn Lodge in 1962 peaked at 2,500 members. It was the largest in the state. Today we're at about 350. Most of those were deaths. And unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that, but it's going to happen. But right now, we're financially secure. And to date, since January of this year, we've probably raised 13 brothers already. So
that's awesome.
It's looking good.
I know that you belong to several Appendant Masonic organizations. Tell us about some of them.
Well, I'm in Royal Arch, and I'm in all the York Rite. I'm in Red Cross of Constantine. I'll go in as puissant master here in a couple of years. I'm also in the Allied Masonic degrees, Thistle and Rose Council number 27. I'm a past sovereign master there. I'm a member of Ahmed Shrine up in the Upper Peninsula because I know the guys up there very well, and we get along great. I enjoy their company, and I enjoy being part of that. And because of that, they elected me to membership in the Jester's Court in the Upper Peninsula. And, of course, Scottish Rite. It's the biggest one.
What leadership positions have you held? You mentioned that you're a past sovereign master, and what other leadership positions have you held in the appendant bodies?
Well, sovereign master in allied Masonic degrees. I have been vice president and president of the board of trustees of the Valley of Detroit, and worshipful master Dearborn Lodge, and not to mention, of course, Grand Master.
Of the appendant bodies that you belong to, you must have a couple of favorites. Which ones do you enjoy the most?
Probably two right off the bat, and that would be Scottish Rite, of course, and Red Cross. We have a great bunch of guys in St. Clement Conclave, and we enjoy each other's company immensely, and I look forward to their dinner meetings. We have a lot of fun.
You've been very involved with Masonic renewal, both here in Michigan and on the national level. Tell us a little bit how you got involved with that and why that's such a passion for you.
Well, I got involved in Masonic renewal, I'd have to say, back about 1992. And at the time, Don Reno, who's a past Grand Master, was in the Grand Lodge line at the time, and he said, there's a guy on the west side of the state that you have to meet. And Don knew that I was very passionate about renewal on the lodge level and wanting to make changes. And that guy on the west side of the state happened to be Most Worshipful Brother Bob Conley. And Bob and I eventually met and hit it off, and Bob was just as passionate about Masonic renewal as I was. And Bob had already been tapped to be on the Masonic Renewal Committee of North America, which is a national committee under the Conference of Grand Masters of North America. And so as a lodge officer, I was invited out to Denver, Colorado to one of their meetings to make a presentation from a lodge level and from not a Grand Lodge type officer, but from a lodge officer.
That had to be a pretty big deal.
It was. It was huge, actually. I was pretty impressed. And one thing led to another, and I was asked to sit on that committee. And I served on that committee for quite a while, and Bob went on as chairman of that committee, and then I followed Bob as chairman, and I was probably chairman about 4.5 years, and then I stepped down. And then recently, the Sovereign Grand Commander of Northern Masonic Jurisdiction has asked me to go back on that committee as the representative of the Northern Masonic Jurisdiction of Scottish Rite. So I've come full circle. I served and I left, and now I'm back. And Bob is also now back on that committee also. So it was that passion for Masonic renewal and to make changes in our fraternity to move it forward into the future that keeps driving me. And it's that renewal.
You mentioned representing the Scottish Rite and the renewal. You are currently the deputy for the Scottish Rite for Michigan, which is basically the chief executive officer of Scottish Rite in the state. Why don't you tell everybody about what that position entails and what some of your responsibilities are?
The position, I liken it to a Grand Master. Each year you set up a council of deliberation session. You have to set up...
which is like a Grand Lodge.
Which is like a mini Grand Lodge. Right. The council of deliberation, in Michigan there's 5 Scottish Rite valleys. Detroit, Grand Rapids, Bay City, Traverse City, and Marquette. Those 5 valleys come together and their officers and the 33rd degree Masons in the state along with the Meritorious Service Award recipients, and they form the Council of Deliberation. So each year we meet as a council to approve budgets, to enact any kind of law that needs to be enacted or bylaw changes, things like that, and also to have a great deal of fun. So each year that's like a mini Grand Lodge. Also each year, up until we're going to make some changes, but the Supreme Council holds an annual meeting. This year it'll be in Washington, D.C., and as deputy I have certain responsibilities for the Michigan contingent that's coming there. Set up hospitality rooms, work with my wife to set up ladies' lunches, set up candidate breakfasts, and the big culmination of the actual meeting is the Michigan State dinner or banquet that we're having. So that's also, on a lesser extent, another mini Grand Lodge. So each year you're doing that. Plus you're approving scholarships. Plus you're dealing with the valley officers of each one of the valleys. And you work with 2 other active members in the state who help you out. but it takes up a lot of time. Just yesterday I was busy writing letters to the new recipients of the Meritorious Service Award, congratulating them on receiving it and that they'll be invited to the Council of Deliberation next June up in Gaylord. So there's a lot of correspondence, there's a lot of meetings you attend, and then also as deputy and serving as an active member of the Supreme Council, I'm also on various committees with the Supreme Council. I serve on the Membership Committee. I also am chairman of the Membership Services Committee. I serve as a trustee on the Masonic Museum and Library Board. And so there's a lot of travel, not only within Michigan, but also between Detroit and Lexington, Massachusetts, where our headquarters is.
Very good. And how long have you been deputy?
I became deputy in August of 1989, and that's a 9-year position.
You have, over the years, received many honors and awards. Are there a couple that are more special than others, or a couple that just stand out as memorable experiences?
Well, there's two. When I was Grand Master, the annual meeting of the Scottish Rite was held in Boston, Massachusetts. And at the Michigan State dinner that evening, I was sitting at the table with the then deputy, Most Worshipful Brother Robert Osborne. And he was up at the microphone and announcing who would be the recipients to receive the 33rd degree the following year. And at the time, and at present also, I'm the editor of the Valley of Detroit's publication, The Valley Voice. So when he was at the microphone, he said, "Everybody get your pens and papers out, I'm about to announce the names." So I had my pen and paper out because I'm going to write down the recipients from Detroit so I can include them in the Valley publication. And so Bob said, "Well, this has only happened one other time before." And come to find out that was for Most Worshipful Brother Bill Skrepnik. But he began, he said, "The first recipient is David," and I begin to write David, and he said R, and I write R, and he said Bedwell, and I got B-E-D, and I said, "Wait a minute," and the whole room was standing and applauding, and so receiving the 33rd degree was, to me, a very high honor. My father was a 33rd degree Mason. Unfortunately, about 2 weeks after I was installed as Grand Master is when he passed away. So I was unable to spend that time with him, and he was not there to see me receive the 33rd degree, although my mother did make the trek to St. Louis the following year where I did receive it. The other honor that stands out and is very meaningful to me is also an honor my father received, and I received it at Grand Lodge in 1997, and that was the State Mason of the Year Award. And to think that you are being honored by your peers is very humbling. And to follow my father by receiving that award held deep meaning for me. And that award, the trophy-style award, still has a prominent place in my office right now.
I got to believe you're the only father-son to have received that award.
I believe you're right.
You had mentioned Most Worshipful Brother Bob Osborne and Most Worshipful Brother Don Reno. Tell us about some of the other past Grand Masters that you knew personally prior to your time.
Well, first, the funny story about Bob Osborne, and I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know he was a Mason or anything else. All I knew, he was Mark Osborne's dad. And Mark Osborne and I were both members of Boy Scout Troop 1111 out of Cherry Hill Presbyterian Church. And to receive your Eagle Award, you first go before a board of review of leaders and some of the fathers in the troop. And they ask you a series of questions. And sitting there on my Eagle Scout board of review was Bob Osborne. And I had no idea. So Bob knew me for a long time. But Bob Osborne, obviously a member of my lodge, quite a mentor. We used to call him Blue Book Bob. Bob knew Michigan Masonic law inside and out. He didn't even have to look at the book. He knew it. Others were Don Reno, as we mentioned, Most Worshipful Brother Dale Edwards, Don Boyer, Bob Stevens. And then he wasn't a past Grand Master at the time, but he was and he still is one of my biggest mentors, and that's Most Worshipful Brother Bob Conley.
Well, since you brought up the subject of mentors, who were some of your Masonic mentors? I'm sure your father.
Well, yeah, my father, number one. He encouraged me to read all I could. You know, men join this fraternity and they sit there, well, I don't know anything. Well, you know, there's thousands and thousands of books. I personally would not join any organization unless I knew something about it. So I read a great deal about the fraternity. And my father encouraged me to. He had a very extensive library, and I used to go through it and pull books and read them all the time. Don Reno was one of my biggest supporters and mentor, and I'd have to list Don Boyer right at the top, and he still is to this day. Yeah, funny thing, I'd known Don Reno because he was such good friends of my parents, him and Pam both, and we were at his, it was either his or Dale Edwards' Grand Lodge session, and I want to say it was Don's, and we were up in the Grand Master's suite. And I can remember standing there in a white dinner jacket and a black tie, and my wife was with the ladies sitting in the suite over on the couch, and all of a sudden I'm standing there and I have Don Reno, Dale Edwards, Don Boyer, there was probably somebody else on the other side surrounding me, saying, you know, we really would like you to consider getting in the Grand Lodge line as a moving officer. And I just kind of smiled and I said, well, you're asking the wrong guy. And they said, well, what do you mean? Who should we be asking? I said, you should be over there at the couch asking her. Well, they left me so quick and they surrounded her on this couch. And the rest, later that year, I threw my hat in the ring. And I threw my hat in the ring mainly because I respected those men and what they were doing for my life, and I wanted to be part of them.
Well, that was actually the next question, was what made you decide to run for Grand Lodge, and certainly their encouragement was a prime factor, but was there anything else that went into your thinking about it after they asked?
Yes, and the real turning point, besides those guys, Michigan had undertaken Masonic renewal, full force, and each year our governance changes. The Grand Master changes, and he could come in at any given time, a new guy, and throw everything out and start something totally new. And Bob Conley and I had been working very hard in Michigan with the Acacia program, which was membership and leadership seminars that we were taking throughout the state. We were working with another Mason, a consultant out of Maryland called Dudley Davis, his name was, who was very good, wrote a lot of the materials for the Masonic Renewal Committee of North America. And together we were going throughout Michigan really working Masonic renewal. And it was a hard road. Guys find change very difficult. And so in the very beginning, when we tried to institute some changes, they fought us. But then as time went on, they slowly began to adopt change. So by the time 1997 rolled around, we were on a roll. And my greatest fear was that at any given time, a man would step in as Grand Master and totally throw the program out the window. And I felt that by getting in the Grand Lodge line, I could at least try to prevent that from happening and to keep Masonic renewal moving forward in Michigan. And I'm very happy to say that it is, even to this day. It continued, and now it's even gone to the next level, which is I'm very happy about to see that those changes have taken place.
I think Michigan and people from Michigan have always been in the forefront of Masonic.
Michigan has been very respected throughout the nation as one of the leaders in Masonic renewal and change.
When you got elected to the Grand Lodge line, was there anything that took you by surprise that you're like, I didn't know that, or I didn't expect that?
I always looked at Grand Lodge as being a business, and it is. It's a major corporation. I didn't know to the extent that as Grand Master I would be involved in the business early on. I found out rather quickly. The other thing that surprised me was the amount of travel, the meetings, and as you move up the Grand Lodge line, your responsibilities become more extensive. And now you're on finance committees, and you're on all sorts of various other committees. You're on the Michigan Masonic Charitable Foundation, and at the time you were on the Michigan Masonic Foundation, and all of those are meetings, all of those are times. Most of those were in Lansing. And from my house in Canton, Michigan to Lansing, it got to where I could just put the car on automatic and it would just find its way there, because I drove that route so many times. And I'll tell you, there were several times driving home at 11 o'clock at night when I had to be at work the next morning at 6:30. And I used to ask myself the question, why am I doing this? And so I'd call up Bob Conley and I'd say, you know, I'm tired of this. He says, you're not going anywhere. And then every now and then Bob would call me up and he'd say, you know, and I'd say, you're not going anywhere. So it's quite a journey. It's one I would never, I would do over again. I mean, I have no regrets, but it's a lot more extensive than people see a Grand Master at a lodge dinner, giving out a 50-year pin, or at a lodge dedication or rededication and going through some ritual. They have no idea what that man is doing behind the scenes. And so a lot of people will sit there and go, well, I can do that. No, you really might not be able to. You have to give it a lot of thought.
I agree. Tell us some of the highlights of your year as Grand Master. 2002, 2003 was your year.
Two big highlights stand out. And I had a wonderful year. I often say I put 50,000 miles in the air and I put 50,000 miles on my car. And I had a great boss at the time because I was still working. And fortunately, because I had moved up in tenure with Ford Motor Company, I had 5 weeks vacation. I was able to buy 2 weeks, which gave me 7 weeks. Now, Grand Lodge went from May to May. So come January, I had another 7 weeks. So I had about a total of 14 weeks vacation and a very understanding boss. And quick side note to that, I left for Grand Lodge to be installed as Grand Master, and I had briefed my boss on exactly what was going to take place and what was going to happen throughout the following year, and he didn't have a problem with it. He understood. I was gone a week. I came back from Grand Lodge as Grand Master. I walked into the office and found out I had a new boss, and she didn't know anything about Freemasonry. And immediately we had to talk. And I couldn't have asked for a better boss. She was totally understanding, except when my successor was installed and I came back to work the following Monday. She said, "Are you done?" And I said, "I'm done." She said, "Good. Here," and laid a pile of work on me. But two things stand out. One, because I was very active in scouting, and because the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania had worked with the Boy Scouts of America, they had formed the Daniel Carter Beard Scout Award. And that was given to Masons who were still very active in their units and their troops and their cub packs and their explorer posts, etc. And so I formed the Masonic Scouter Committee, and I couldn't have put a better guy in charge. Brother Metzler took it over for me. And since then, Don has passed away, and it was very unfortunate. He died way too early. But Don was a ball of fire, and he took that program and just ran with it. And he even started an Eagle Scout recognition program of Masons who had received the Eagle Award. So I'm very pleased and happy about that program that's still in existence today. It's still running strong. And the other program is, the year prior, or 2 years prior, I can't remember which, the Grand Lodge of Ohio had instituted an All-Masonic Degree Day. And that's where a man could become a Mason in one day, receive all 3 degrees, and also join Scottish Rite and the Shrine on the same day. The thinking behind that was younger men that were joining the fraternity, their work schedules were much more extensive. Employers expected them to be there longer hours, work weekends, etc. So the young men were finding the joining process somewhat problematic at times, trying to find time for their entered apprentice degree and then come back and come back and come back. So Ohio was very successful. And so I looked at that and I said, you know, that may be a great thing for Michigan to try. So I put Most Worshipful Brother Rick Rulin, who I believe was junior warden at the time.
Would have been senior deacon.
Okay, senior deacon, you're right. And I asked him to chair that committee, interface with the representative who handled it in Ohio, who was Jim Dale, and Rick did. Rick did an absolute fabulous job. So on April 5th, 2003, I partnered with the 5 Scottish Rite Valleys. So the Valley of Detroit, there was an all-day class in Detroit, Grand Rapids, Bay City, and Marquette. Help me, Walt. Was there one in Traverse City?
Yes.
There was one in Traverse City. Park Place Hotel, that's right. So on that day, men joined. We brought out the very best ritualists. So the work was phenomenal. Each man that came in had a mentor. And the mentor supplied him with a miniature Bible and a miniature square and compasses that he took his obligation on. And on that day, approximately 650 to 700 men became Michigan Masons. Several of them became Scottish Rite Masons, and another percentage of that became Shrine Masons. So all in all, it was a very successful day. I'm very pleased with the way it turned out. I'm very proud of that. But I will tell you, I caught a lot of heat. I actually have a file at home to this day called Masonic Hate. I received hate letters from some of our older brothers that I was just the devil in disguise and that this all-Masonic degree day was just terrible. And we're making McMasons and everything else. But I'll tell you what, I know a lot of Masons right now that were raised on that day, and they're worshipful masters of their lodges, they're Board of General Purposes representatives, they have leadership roles in their York Rite, they have leadership roles in the Scottish Rite and the Shrine. So call them what you will, but they're all great Masons, and the day was successful. So out of it all, I would say the Scouter Committee and the All-Masonic Degree Day.
And you're right, it was a great day. And I steered you wrong. Rick was the junior warden. I should have thought of that because I was your senior deacon.
There you go.
What do you think the fraternity needs to do to grow and prosper?
You know, since the fraternity grew at a rapid rate up until about 1959. And from 1959 to today, we basically lost 3 to 3.5%. And not only in Michigan, this is nationwide, this is even in Canada. It's just not a phenomenon to one state or one organization. Churches are suffering the same thing. Other organizations are suffering. We brought in so many people back then that I believe Masons forgot how to have fun and forgot that this is first and foremost a fraternity of friendship and fellowship. Dearborn Lodge was raising men so quickly that they were raising them in the other room where I was raised, and they were raising them in this room that we're sitting in illegally because the charter is only in the one room. It didn't take Grand Lodge too long to find out what was happening, and they shut down the illegal raising. But every Monday night the lodge met, and every Monday night, with the exception of the regular meeting on the second Monday, they had work. Then along came 65, 67, 68, maybe 1970, where they weren't coming to the doors as quickly. And the men are sitting in the lodge room going, well, we don't have any work. What do we do now? They forgot how to have fun. And change became very difficult to them. Some of our older members feel very comfortable coming to Lodge because they know they're going to read the minutes, they're going to do the treasurer's report, they know exactly what's going to happen, and that is very comforting to them. Now along come some young whippersnappers and they decide to make some changes, and it rocks their world, and they're uncomfortable with that. So they naturally fight the change. But I think to survive, And to attract the younger men of today, we have to go back to being a fraternity, first and foremost. The ritual is what binds us and keeps us together as a fraternity, but it's the fellowship and the friendship of this organization that is the real driving force and the real attraction. There is the history. We have two factions of younger men that I see joining today. One are there for the fellowship and friendship, and they enjoy that. The other are there for the fellowship and friendship also, but they're also there for the esoteric nature of the fraternity and the history and the Masonic secrets. And I would tend to say that the real secret is the friendship and fellowship of this fraternity and the men you meet and the relationships that you make and create and then bond together and is everlasting. My journey since 1989 through today, I know men all across the United States and all around the world that I can pick up a phone and talk to them as a friend and brother and ask them for assistance or not or whatever, and they'll give me the shirt off their back. And that's very powerful when you think about it, that around the world I have friends that I have made through this fraternity. And it truly is a fraternity of men and Masons.
I agree. What would you tell a young man that was thinking about becoming a Mason? What advice would you give him? What would you tell him to think about?
Well, I'll tell you what I told my son. And he just joined recently, and I said he's 30, and he just joined last year, so 29. He wasn't ready to join necessarily. And there was a fundamental problem with him. He looked at Freemasonry as me, and the level of activity that I was involved in, the meetings I was attending, that if he joined, he would have to do that. And I had to assure him, and his grandfather assured him that that wasn't the case. It was what he has to make out of it and the road he wants to travel. And now that he just had a brand new baby, he has to be home with the baby and take care of his family. And he understands that. But he also enjoys the friends that he's already made within the lodge and the friends that he's now making with Scottish Rite. So can he be here for every meeting? No. I wouldn't expect him to be here. I wouldn't want him to be here for every meeting. Not when he has a baby at home and a wife that's working. Take it easy. Go slow. Become involved. And read. A lot of the younger guys that are joining our fraternity know a great deal more about Freemasonry than most of our more seasoned members because of the internet. You tell a kid today about anything and he's going to Google it. And they've Googled Freemasonry. They already know the grips. They know the words. They know the ritual in most cases because it's all online. So when you go out to do a home visitation of a new member and you start talking to them about Freemasonry, they're already asking you questions that are blowing you away because you're wondering how he knows all this already. Well, he learned it all on the internet. Now, is everything on the internet true? Of course not. But I would tell a young man that it's the greatest fraternity on earth. It's the oldest. You're going to meet some great friends. You're going to make some lifelong relationships with brothers. And it's where you want to be. It'll make you a great man and a great father and a great husband. And you want to join.
What would you tell a man about to become worshipful master for the first time? What advice would you give him?
Well, I would have probably started with him long before he ever sat in the chair of junior warden. That it's all about planning, 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 and planning. And to have a successful year as worshipful master, to have a successful year as grand master, takes a great deal of planning and to make sure everything is the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. You know, for so long, this fraternity associates leadership with ritual. And I don't beat that drum, and I never have. And we have turned away some really great men who would have been great worshipful masters, great grandmasters, and great leaders of our craft had it not been sometimes for ritual. And I don't, and don't get me wrong, I'm not bashing ritual at all. There's men out there who embrace it, who love it, who are great at it, who do an outstanding job, and I truly appreciate that. But there's nothing wrong for a guy who's a true leader and a true planner and that can manage and lead the lodge. And if he can't quite open lodge properly or just can't do the degree properly, there's nothing wrong with him sitting there as worshipful master and saying, now we're going to confer the entered apprentice degree. Would the entered apprentice degree team take their stations? And he gets up and goes and sits on the sideline. But throughout our history, if you can't open lodge properly or whatever, you can't possibly be worshipful master. And that's wrong. And that's one of the major changes we have to make. We have to quit associating ritual with leadership.
What would you tell somebody that was thinking about running for Grand Lodge, which is an entirely different animal?
Well, and I've been asked, and I've told them. And what I've told them is, first thing I tell them is you have to have the job. You either have to be retired or you have to have the job that will allow you the time necessary to do the proper job. As I already indicated, I had a great boss and I had plenty of vacation. So when I had to leave work at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to head to Alma for a foundation meeting, I had a boss that would just look the other way as I walked out the door. And I paid that back once I was done being Grand Master. But so I tell them, first off, you either have to be retired or you have to have the job that will allow you the time. The second thing is, I said, do you truly understand what it is you're getting into? Now I know that Grand Lodge, I call it 80-20. 20% of being Grand Master is passing out that 50-year pin, doing a rededication, visiting lodges, etc., going to the youth groups and spending time with them. 80% of the job of Grand Master is strictly business. You're running a major multi-million-dollar corporation. You're dealing with finance people, you're dealing with investment counselors, you're dealing with attorneys, and you're running the business of the Grand Lodge. So if a man doesn't think he has the aptitude or the business savvy to be able to run a major corporation, now don't get me wrong, you have plenty of help, people help you, and you have advisors. But as Harry Truman, most worshipful brother Harry Truman said, the buck stops here. And that's still true as Grand Master. And you still, at the end of the year, your term, you stand before the Grand Lodge voting delegates and you lay your year out. And they'll tell you what they think you did, if you did a good year or not, and by voting on your actions. So I tell them that about the corporation, I tell them about having the job, and I tell them about the time. And I also ask, is your wife supportive of this? And if he says, well, not really, then I would tell him, I think you should reconsider. Because if you don't have your spouse behind you 100%, it'll be a very, very difficult year. And in my case, not only was my wife behind me 100%, I had 2 small kids at home. So for her to travel with me in some cases, it was a juggling act all the time on who's going to watch the kids to make sure they get to school and back, etc., etc. And we got through it. My wife asked me several times, why do you want to do, when I was Grand Master, I was 47 years old. Why do you want to do this now? Why don't you want to wait till you retire? Well, that's a great question. I would have had more time, the kids would have been older, etc. Because I wanted to make a difference in the lives of Masons and in the Grand Lodge of Michigan, while I still had the energy and the willpower to make those changes. And now I can sit back and hopefully I'm in a role of somewhat of a mentor for other people that are in the Grand Lodge line, where I can now help them and help guide them and offer them advice and assistance. And enjoy being a past Grand Master. And now, as you indicated, I've moved on. I'm now Deputy of Scottish Rite in Michigan, which I'm having a great time at. I enjoy it. I enjoy Scottish Rite a lot. And Scottish Rite brings its own challenges. Right now, we're also in a membership decline that we're trying to turn around. Some of our valleys are in financial difficulty, and working with them to try to turn that around. So it's but for a man to consider making that giant leap into the Grand Lodge moving line, he has to give it a lot of thought, and he has to talk to a lot of people and get a lot of advice. And most of the past Grand Masters I know would probably give him some of the same things. You have to have the job. You understand you're going to run a corporation. You understand it's more than just giving out a pin.
It's funny because when you mentioned the question your wife asked, my wife asked me the same question. How has Masonry impacted your life?
Oh, it has changed my life in everything. Everything I do. All of my friends, with the exception of one, who was my best man at my wedding, and we went to high school together, and we hired in at Ford Motor Company the same day, we left Ford Motor Company the same day, and we worked in the same department. He's not a Mason. Wish he was, but he's not. All of my other friends and all of my other close friends are all Masons, and they're all active Masons. They're all actively involved in some facet of this fraternity. My vacations are with Masons. My weekends are spent with Masons. Even downtime weekends of just having a lot of fun and enjoyment and kicking back is with Masons. My wife the same way. Our whole life revolves around this fraternity. And as being Grand Master or in the Grand Lodge line for 7 years, that's a major commitment. You're working it every day. Same goes true for Scottish Rite and being an active member of the Supreme Council and Deputy. I'm working it every day. So it's part of my life. It's part of what I do. I'm retired from Ford, but I'm just as happy working with Scottish Rite. It gives me a sense of being. And as I indicated earlier, I know Masons from all around the world. I've visited England and Scotland several times, and I have friends over there that'll bring you into their homes and you spend the night. I know Masons in France and Germany and Romania. Not to mention probably almost every state in the United States and most of the provinces in Canada. I'm the rep for the Grand Lodge of Michigan to Manitoba. So it's my life, right? It's my entire being, and I wouldn't change it, and I couldn't think of a better place to be right now.
Any final reflections on the fraternity?
Well, I guess I just kind of indicated it. My reflections are very tainted because it is my life. I think every man should be a Freemason. If they were, we wouldn't have the strife that we have throughout the world today. You wouldn't have to worry about bombings and terrorism and taking your shoes off in airport security lines because a Mason has your back and you can count on Masons. And so it's just been a great experience. My only regret, if it's even a regret, would be that I didn't join it a lot sooner than I did to experience the fun. But I'm glad I did. And I look forward to the next Masonic golf outing.
Thank you very much, David. We appreciate you being with us today and being part of our legacy series.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.